2,000 meters. That's how far away the shot came from. The SEAL operator hit the ground before anyone heard the sound. 6 men, pinned on a frozen ridge in the Blackstone Range. Fog so thick they couldn't see the next man's boots. An enemy they couldn't locate. A high-value target locked inside a fortified compound below, and 0 options left. Then a voice came from the darkness behind them, calm, quiet, and already annoyed. You walked into all 3 of them. I've been watching since Tuesday. Nobody had briefed them on a 7th operator. Nobody had told them she was already up there. If this story hit you, subscribe and follow me to the end. The next one will shake you just as hard. Drop a like and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The Blackstone Range didn't care about any of them. That was the first thing Commander Ethan Cole thought when the helicopters dropped them at the insertion point. That the mountains were indifferent in the way very old things tend to be. The peaks sat in layers, dark granite dissolving into snow at the upper elevations, and above the snow there was only fog. Dense, unmoving, gray as old bone. The kind of fog that didn't drift. It just sat there, like it had always been there, and would be long after everything that happened tonight was forgotten. Cole checked his gloves, then checked them again. A nervous habit he'd picked up in Kandahar and never shaken. The 6-man team organized themselves in the tree line without being told. That was the thing about operating with people long enough. The choreography went wordless. Petty Officer 2nd Class Danny Hatch moved to Cole's left shoulder. Petty Officer 1st Class Marcus Webb anchored the rear. The other 3, Torres, Klein, and the newer guy, Sergeant Provisional Jake Rourke, spread across the middle like they'd done it 100 times. They had done it 100 times. Cole pulled up the terrain map on his wrist-mounted display and stared at it for 4 seconds. Not because he needed to. He had the map memorized. He did it because staring at something concrete helped when the fog made the world feel like it had no edges. The target was General Victor Rains, formerly of the Krasnov Separatist Command Structure, now operating as an independent military contractor trafficking intelligence assets across 3 time zones. The compound sat at approximately 1,600 meters elevation, lower than their insertion point, which gave them a descent advantage. Satellite imagery showed a main structure, 2 outlying guard posts, a vehicle shed, and what the analysts believed was a secure communications room in the compound's northeast corner. The analysts also believed there were approximately 9 to 14 hostile personnel on site. Cole had learned to treat analyst headcounts the way he treated expiration dates on military rations, a general guideline, not a promise. "Winds at 8 knots from the northwest," Webb murmured into the team channel, checking his Kestrel. "Temperatures dropped 4 degrees since wheels up." "Humidity's climbing," Hatch added. "Fog's thickening down slope." "Fantastic." That was Torres. He had a gift for sounding bored in situations that would cause most people to stop breathing. "I love it when we can't see anything." "Rourke." Cole kept his voice flat. "You good?" A brief pause. The kind of pause that told you more than the words that followed it. "Good, sir." Cole didn't push. Rourke was 26, out of a Virginia Beach training cycle that had run short on time because of operational tempo. He'd been inserted into the team 3 weeks ago as a provisional slot filler. His file was solid. Marksmanship scores in the top 8%, good fitness numbers, 0 behavioral flags. But files didn't tell you how a man breathed when the environment turned hostile and the variables stopped making sense. That part you only learned by being next to someone. They moved. The descent through the upper tree line was slow and methodical. Cole kept the pace deliberate, not cautious, just measured. Every footfall checked before the weight transferred. The fog deadened sound at range but amplified anything close, and he'd found over the years that fog was the kind of environment that made people paranoid in one of 2 directions. They either went too fast because they felt invisible, or they froze completely. Both would get you killed. The Blackstone Range was remote enough that it didn't appear on civilian maps by name. The military designation was Area Whiskey 9, which covered approximately 340 square kilometers of high-altitude terrain along what had once been a contested border zone. The area had been cold for 2 years. No active operations, no significant intelligence traffic, nothing worth watching. Then Rains had shown up. Specifically, a SIGINT intercept had placed Rains at a compound in the range 6 days ago. The intercept was partial, fragments from an encrypted burst transmission that NSA took 48 hours to partially decode, but enough to confirm identity and approximate location. The window for action was narrow. Rains moved. He always moved. The window the analysts gave them was 72 hours before the next expected personnel rotation. They were 18 hours inside that window. The first 40 minutes of descent were clean. Then the fog shifted. It was subtle, the way fog shifted always was. Not a dramatic change, not a sudden clearing, just a slight thinning at the lower elevations that changed the visual texture of the mountain. Cole noticed it and said nothing, because there was nothing useful to say about weather. You accounted for it and kept moving. They were crossing a secondary ridgeline, approximately 1,900 meters elevation, when Cole's instincts fired. He stopped. The team stopped with him. No command. No signal. They felt it through whatever shared frequency develops between people who've operated together long enough. Cole stood very still and listened. Wind in the trees. His own breathing. The faint creak of someone's gear behind him. Probably Webb's plate carrier, which had a buckle that occasionally worked loose in cold temperatures. He'd mentioned it twice. Webb had said he'd fix it, and then nothing. That was the problem. The mountain had gone quiet in a way that wasn't natural. Not the quiet of emptiness, the quiet of something waiting. Hold, Cole said softly into the comms. Everyone held. 30 seconds, 40. Cole was just beginning to wonder if his instincts had misfired. It happened, even to people who'd been doing this long enough to trust them, when the shot came. The sound reached them a full 2 seconds after the impact. Danny Hatch dropped. Not a stumble, not a stagger. A drop. Instant and total, the way bodies dropped when the nervous system stopped receiving instructions. Cole was moving before the echo finished rolling through the valley, but there was nothing to move toward. The shot had come from somewhere upslope, somewhere in the fog, at a range that made his rifle feel like a toy. Contact ridge high, unknown bearing. Webb's voice came through calm, which Cole appreciated. Hatch is down! Hatch is down! On him. That was Torres, already low, already moving to Hatch's position. Cole heard the sound of a medical assessment beginning without being told. Torres checking pulse, checking the wound. Still with us, Torres reported 12 seconds later. Shoulder, through and through, didn't hit the subclavian. He's going to be loud about it. I am not, Hatch said, which meant he was conscious. Cole had repositioned behind a granite outcrop that offered reasonable cover from the upslope direction. He was running calculations in his head and not enjoying the results. The shooter had engaged from fog cover, at range, with what sounded from the report like a large-caliber suppressed weapon. The round had arrived before the sound. That meant distance, real distance, somewhere north of 1,000 meters, maybe significantly more. At that range, their carbines were a morale exercise. Klein, Cole kept his voice level, northeast ridgeline. Anything? Klein had the team's best optics and had quietly moved to a position with angle on the upper ridge. He took a moment before answering, which meant he was actually looking and not just reporting what he hoped to see. Negative. I've got fog and rock. Nothing I can call a position. Rourke, you're on Hatch. Copy. Webb. Cole waited a beat. Tell me you have something. Marcus Webb had a gift for topographic intuition, a kind of spatial intelligence that made him valuable in complex terrain. He could look at a ridgeline and tell you where someone would position if they were thinking. It wasn't magic. It was pattern recognition built on years of studying how people used high ground. If I was shooting from up there, Webb said carefully, I'd want the north-facing shoulder. It's the only position that gives you clean angle on this traverse. Problem is, that's roughly, he paused, 12 to 1,400 meters. Maybe more. So we can't answer it. Not with what we're carrying. Cole pressed his back against the rock and processed. The team was stopped on an exposed ridgeline at nearly 2,000 meters elevation. One man down, wounded but mobile. A long-range shooter somewhere above them in conditions that negated their ability to locate or engage. The compound below was still an objective. The extraction window didn't flex. He thought about calling in fire support and dismissed it immediately. The fog made air assets useless. They were beyond effective range of organic mortars. What artillery existed in theater was positioned to support a completely different area of operations, and the time-distance math didn't work. He thought about withdrawing and dismissed that too. Hatch needed a medevac, but withdrawal meant moving back across the same terrain the shooter covered, and a moving wounded man was easier to range than a stationary one. He thought about pushing forward and nearly dismissed that, and then didn't, because something about the geometry of the engagement bothered him. The shot had been precise, one round, through the shoulder, threading between the plate and the arm gap, at extreme range, in fog, at night. That wasn't a triggered shot. That wasn't someone who saw a target of opportunity and took it. That was a controlled shot. A message, meant to stop them, not finish them. Cole wasn't sure what to do with that yet. "Sir?" Klein's voice came through the earpiece with a different quality, tighter. "I've got movement, upslope, single contact, moving along the ridgeline toward our position. No hostile indicator that I can. It's not moving like weapons? Rifle, long gun. But it's, sir, the movement pattern is wrong for an approach. It's more like," then the voice came out of the fog. Not from a radio, from approximately 20 meters upslope, in the darkness behind a cluster of boulders that none of them had flagged as a concern. "I need all of you to stay exactly where you are and not do anything stupid." The voice was female, low, matter-of-fact, the kind of tone that expected to be obeyed and was prepared to be disappointed. 5 weapons came up. Instinctive, automatic, the team responding to an unexpected contact the way trained people responded, immediately and with geometry. "I'm not one of them." The voice didn't change. No fear in it, no irritation either, which was somehow more unnerving. "I've been on this mountain for 3 days, and I've had better opportunities to engage you than right now, so let's not waste each other's time." Cole held his position and his weapon and his breathing. "Identify." A pause. "Captain Maya Voss. I'm going to step out. If anyone fires, I will be upset." She stepped out. She was wearing a ghillie suit that had been modified, pieces removed, others repositioned, in a way Cole didn't recognize, optimized for the specific texture of this terrain at this elevation. The rifle on her back was a .338 Lapua Magnum on a custom platform he didn't immediately identify. She was carrying too much weight for a casual insertion and didn't look burdened by it. Her face was weathered in the way faces got weathered when people spent serious time in serious environments, early to mid-30s. Maybe. The cold made age harder to read. She looked at the team the way you looked at a problem that had become more complicated than expected. "How's your shoulder, man?" "He'll live," Torres said, before Cole could answer. "Good." She looked at Cole. "You're Cole. You know who I am." "I was briefed on the unit. Wasn't expecting you to make contact on the North Traverse. That route has a coverage problem. Someone in your planning cell missed it." Cole kept his voice even. "Who do you work for?" "Right now, the same people you work for, which means this conversation is productive." She shifted the weight of her rifle and glanced upslope. "We don't have a lot of time for introductions. There are 3 long-range shooters controlling the upper ridge. The one who engaged your man is at approximately 1,400 meters on the north shoulder, which is where your analyst put him, so give them partial credit. The second is at 1,650 on the southeast face. The third is the one nobody's found yet, which is why you need to be listening to me." Cole stared at her for a moment. "You've been watching them." 3 days. Flat. No emphasis. They were in position before the compound went active. This isn't a defensive reaction force. They were pre-positioned. Someone knew your window. The words landed in the cold air, and Cole let them land. "You're saying there's a leak." "I'm saying someone on your coordination chain moved information they shouldn't have, and now you have a targeted interdiction setup waiting for you instead of a static guard force." She looked at him steadily. "Which changes the math." Webb spoke carefully from behind his position. "How long have you been tracking the third shooter?" "I picked up his pattern yesterday morning. He's mobile, repositioning every 90 minutes. He's better than the other 2. She paused. "He's also the one who's been coordinating them, which means he's not just a shooter, he's a controller. Take him out and you disrupt their targeting cycle." "Can you locate him now?" She looked at Webb for a moment and then back at Cole, and the look wasn't unfriendly. It was the look of someone doing a calculation. "That's what I was doing when your team walked into the ridge and made things complicated." Hatch, from his position on the ground, being held by Rourke, managed to say, "She sounds annoyed." I'm not annoyed. She was already moving back toward the boulders. I'm recalculating. You need to stay exactly where you are for the next 12 minutes. Don't engage anything, don't shift position, and for the love of operational security, keep your radio traffic to absolute minimum. And if I don't take tactical direction from someone I can't verify? Cole asked. She stopped, turned, looked at him with an expression that was difficult to read in the fog and darkness, but had something in it that was neither aggressive nor apologetic. Then in about 7 minutes, your team takes a second shot from the east, and the approach to the compound becomes a body recovery operation. She said it the way someone stated physics. Your call, Commander. She moved back into the boulder cluster and disappeared. Cole stood in the fog on the frozen ridgeline and made a decision in approximately 4 seconds, which was about 3.5 seconds longer than the situation probably wanted. Hold position, he said into the team channel. Nobody moves. Sir, Webb said quietly. She knew the north shoulder position. I know. She knew about the planning cell. I know, Marcus. A brief silence. She's been up here 3 days, Klein said, almost to himself. In this. Nobody had a useful response to that, so nobody offered one. They held their positions in the fog and the cold and listened to the mountain breathe. Somewhere above them, invisible, Captain Maya Voss was doing something. What exactly, none of them could see. That was, it turned out, precisely the point. The 12 minutes passed the way. 12 minutes passed when every one of them felt 3 times its actual length. Cole tracked the seconds on his watch because it gave his hands something to do. Rourke was stabilizing Hatch with quiet, precise movements, pressure dressing, splint, keeping the shoulder immobilized against the cold. Hatch was cooperating, which meant the pain hadn't climbed past the level where cooperation became negotiable. Torres had positioned himself where he could watch both upslope and the approach to the northeast. Klein maintained his optics on the upper ridge. Webb was doing what Webb did, reading the terrain in 3 dimensions in his head, building a mental model of where the shooters would be, where they could be, what lines connected the pieces. 9 minutes in, he moved quietly to Cole's position. I ran the geometry, he said, barely above a whisper. If there's a controller, a third shooter running coordination, the only position that gives clean communication angles to both the north shoulder and the southeast face is the spine of the upper ridge, right around the 1800-meter mark. He paused, in the middle of the fog. She'd need to engage from inside the fog. Yeah, at that range. Webb looked at him. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it isn't possible. Cole was quiet for a moment. I'm saying it's extraordinary. The shoulder shot was extraordinary, Webb said, and she didn't miss. The shot came at minute 11. A single report, distinct and hard, rolling down from somewhere above the fog ceiling. Cole felt it more than heard it. A concussive pressure wave that arrived a half second before the sound fully registered. Then silence. Complete and immediate. The mountain went quiet in a different way than it had gone quiet before. Not the quiet of something waiting. The quiet of something that had been removed. 40 seconds later, Maya Voss stepped back out of the boulders. She pulled the bolt on her rifle back smoothly, checked the chamber in a way that looked like habit rather than procedure, and then looked at Cole. The controller is down, she said. The other 2 are going to spend approximately 4 to 6 minutes recalibrating without his coordination. That's your window to reposition to the lower ridge. Cole studied her. 14 minutes ago, you were running a target track from inside the fog. 12 minutes ago, she corrected, which was not the part Cole had expected her to correct. Who sent you? She held his look. I'm not in a position to detail that out here. Then give me something. She was quiet for a moment, not evasive, thoughtful, like she was deciding what was useful versus what was classified versus what simply took too long to explain in a ridgeline debrief at elevation. There was a second intercept, she said finally, 3 days before yours, the kind that suggested the compound wasn't just a way station anymore, the kind that brought in pre-positioned assets. She looked upslope. I was tasked to assess and stand by. Stand by for what? For exactly this. Her eyes came back to him. Your window was compromised before you left the staging area, Commander. They knew you were coming. The question was whether they knew what they were getting into. Cole processed that. And now? Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, not quite satisfaction. Something quieter than both. Now they have a better idea. She shouldered her rifle. 4 minutes left in your window. I'd suggest moving. Cole turned to his team. Lower ridge, 2-column, Rourke and Torres on hatch. Webb, you're on point. They moved. Behind them, Maya Voss fell back into the dark, and if Cole hadn't been watching over his shoulder, he would have lost track of exactly when she disappeared. 1 second she was there, the next she wasn't. The fog closed over the place where she'd been like water over a thrown stone. Whoa. They reached the lower ridge in 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Good time with a wounded man. Hatch was grinding through it without complaint, which Cole noted and would remember. The lower ridge gave them a line of sight to the compound that the upper terrain had blocked. Through his optics, Cole could make out the main structure. Stone and prefabricated wall panels, 2 stories, lights behind the first-floor windows. A guard post at the vehicle entrance. Another on the compound's south wall. He was doing a visual count of personnel indicators when Klein's voice came through the team channel. Contact upslope. The second long-range shooter. I've got a muzzle signature. He just repositioned. How far? 1,600, give or take. He's covering our approach route to the compound entrance. Cole looked at the approach route, then at the compound, then at the terrain on either side. The shooter on the southeast face had the primary approach locked. The alternate approach, a gully that ran along the western edge, was passable but slow and would expose them at the midpoint where the gully opened before the compound's western wall. He was working through the problem when Webb said, very quietly, "She's still up there." Cole looked at him. "The first shooter, the one on the north shoulder. He hasn't taken another shot. If he was going to suppress us while we moved, he had the window." Webb's jaw shifted. He didn't, which means either he lost the angle or the rifle spoke again from above. 1 round, hard, clean. Klein pulled back from his optics. The southeast position just went dark. Nobody said anything for a moment. Somewhere above them, in the fog that she'd made her home for 3 days, Captain Maya Voss had just neutralized the second long-range shooter. From inside the fog, at 1,600 meters, in the dark. Rourke made a sound. Not quite a word, not quite anything expressible in language. Torres looked at the ceiling of fog overhead with an expression Cole had never seen on Torres's face before, and Torres had been in this business long enough to have seen most things. Cole checked the terrain. 1 shooter left on the north shoulder, suppressed but not eliminated. The compound approach was partially open. He was calculating the next move when his radio crackled. Secure channel, authentication code coming through in the burst transmission. He pressed the earpiece tight and listened. Then he stopped moving. Because the transmission wasn't from his command element, it was from the compound. And what it said changed everything he thought he knew about what they were walking into. The transmission lasted 11 seconds. Cole listened to all of it, then listened to the silence after it, then did the thing trained people did when information arrived that didn't fit the existing model. He held very still and let the model break and rebuild around the new information, rather than trying to force the new information into the old model. It didn't take long. The picture assembled itself with a kind of brutal clarity. The voice on the transmission had been speaking in accented English, Russian inflected, careful, the kind of careful that meant the speaker had learned the language in a controlled environment rather than from exposure. The message was short and structured like a status report. Personnel accountability. Weapons ready. The phrase that stopped Cole cold was near the end, almost procedural in how it was delivered. Confirm extraction package is secure. We hold 6 American operators. Transfer at 08400. He pulled the earpiece out slowly. Sir? Webb was watching him. Cole looked at the compound below. Lights in the first-floor windows. A guard rotation he could now see clearly from this elevation. 2 men on the vehicle entrance, 1 on the south wall. A 4th moving along the eastern perimeter in a pattern that repeated every 8 minutes. 6 American operators. They were holding 6 American operators inside that compound, which meant Rains wasn't just an intelligence trafficker moving files and assets across borders. He was running a prisoner operation. And the unit that had been sent to capture him was walking into a facility that held Americans, a fact that had been kept off the mission brief, either because intelligence hadn't known or because someone had decided the team didn't need to know. Cole wasn't sure yet which possibility made him angrier. Change of parameters, he said quietly. Webb, Torres, on me. They gathered tight, close enough to keep voices below the wind. Cole gave it to them straight. No softening, no build-up. Just the transmission content and what it implied. He watched their faces process it the way he'd processed it. The same stillness, the same rebuild happening behind the eyes. Torres spoke first. How recent is the intel package? 48 hours. 48 hours is a long time to move 6 people. It is. Cole looked at the compound. But the transmission used present tense. We hold. Not we held. Not we transferred. Present. Webb's jaw tightened. 0400 is 90 minutes out. I know. That changes the whole approach profile. We can't do a deliberate breach on a structure holding friendly personnel with 2 effective shooters and 1 man down. I know, Marcus. I'm not telling you things you don't know, sir. I'm saying them out loud because saying them out loud is the part where we figure out what we're actually going to do. Cole appreciated that about Webb. He didn't soften problems, and he didn't dress them up. He put them on the table so they could be worked. We need Voss, Cole said. A brief silence. She said she wasn't going to detail her tasking, Torres pointed out. She also wasn't tasked with a hostage situation. Cole looked up slope, into the fog that was still thick and unreadable above their position. Which means either she knows about it, in which case she's been managing information, or she doesn't, in which case she needs to. How do we get to her? We don't. Cole straightened. We let her come to us. Torres looked at him with the expression he reserved for plans that were technically logical but operationally irritating. That's a real plan you've got there. She's been tracking this team since before we arrived. She disengaged after the second shot, but she hasn't gone anywhere. If she'd exfiltrated, we'd have heard movement on the upper ridge. She's still in position. Cole scanned the fog line. She's watching. So we make ourselves visible and wait 30 seconds. Torres stared at him. We make ourselves visible. She's been maintaining cover discipline for 3 days. The only time she broke it was when the team was about to take a second casualty. Cole met Torres's look. We have something more pressing than a second casualty right now. 22 seconds after Cole stepped out from behind the rock cover and stood at full height on the lower ridge, exposed, visible, doing the thing that every instinct in his training screamed against. A shape separated from the shadows 40 meters upslope and moved toward them. Maya Voss moved differently on approach than she did when she was operating. Slightly less deliberate, like a person walking rather than a weapon system in transit. It was a small difference, and it told Cole something he filed away without yet knowing exactly what to do with. She stopped 6 feet from him and read his face before he spoke. What happened? Cole told her. He watched her face during the telling the same way he'd watched his team's faces, looking for the processing, looking for the rebuild. What he saw instead was something that told him she already had at least part of this picture. Not all of it. The 0400 timeline seemed to land new. But the existence of personnel in the compound, he could see in the slight stillness around her eyes that this was not entirely a surprise. When he finished, she was quiet for 4 seconds. How many? Transmission said 6. Military? Didn't specify. She looked at the compound, then back at him. My tasking was assess and interdict. The brief I was given covered Raines's intelligence operation, file transfers, asset movements. It did not include personnel detention. She said it plainly, without apology. I've been on this mountain for 72 hours, and I did not observe evidence of prisoner detention in the compound's external profile, which means they're being held below ground. There was excavation activity in the satellite imagery from 8 months ago. I flagged it in my pre-mission assessment. Her voice shifted slightly, not louder, but with a density that suggested something behind it. The flag was noted and not followed up on. Cole held her look. Someone missed it. Someone decided it wasn't mission critical. She paused. Or someone made a different kind of decision. The implication sat between them in the cold air. Neither of them said the word. You didn't say the word until you had something more than an implication, because the word carried weight that couldn't be put back once you'd used it. If they're underground, Webb said from behind Cole, we have a structural problem. We don't have breach equipment for a subsurface extraction. We don't have enough personnel to hold a perimeter and run a simultaneous rescue element. He paused. And we still have 1 active long-range shooter on the north shoulder. The north shoulder shooter repositioned 7 minutes ago, Maya said. He's covering the vehicle approach to the compound gate, which suggests they're expecting transport, not an incursion. She shifted her weight slightly, a movement that seemed to be something between thought and restlessness. If transport is inbound for 0400, they'll need to open the vehicle gate. That's your entry window. Walk through a vehicle gate, Torres said, while a long-range shooter covers the approach. He'll be covering the approach road, not the perimeter wall. She glanced at Torres briefly. The western perimeter has a dead angle from his current position. The wall is lower there, prefab section, bolted, not poured. It won't hold a vehicle, but a person goes over it in about 4 seconds. Torres looked at the wall, then at her. You've already run the entry geometry. She didn't answer that directly. The western entry puts you in the vehicle shed. From the shed to the main structure is 18 meters of open courtyard. That's your exposure window. 18 meters is a long way in a lit courtyard. Yes, she said it without sugarcoating. It is. Cole was quiet for a moment, running the numbers. 4 seals. Hatch was compromised, which left Torres, Webb, Klein, and Rourke against a guard force that the original brief had estimated at 9-14, potentially supplemented by the transport element arriving before 0400, a subsurface detention area of unknown layout, an active long-range shooter still in play. The math was bad. I need you inside with us, he said. Maya looked at him. Your Overwatch position is worth less to me than a sixth body who knows this compound's geometry and can move through it. He kept his voice level. You've been watching this site for 3 days. You know the guard rotation, the position timings, the structural layout from everything you've been able to observe. That's worth more than another rifle on a ridge. Commander, she said it carefully. My training profile is not CQB. I'm not asking you to run point in a door breach. He gestured at the compound. I'm asking you to help me get 6 Americans out of a hole before 0400. She held his look for a long moment. The fog moved around them, restless, and somewhere above the ridgeline the wind was picking up. He could hear it without feeling it yet, which meant weather was building at elevation. I don't operate under your command authority, she said finally. I know. My decisions in there are mine. Understood. Another pause. Shorter this time. The north shoulder shooter is going to be a problem. Cole waited. Give me 11 minutes, she said. What? She moved back upslope before anyone could respond, and the fog took her the same way it always took her, completely, and without ceremony. Cole turned to his team. Here's what we're doing. He laid it out in 4 minutes, which was about 3 minutes longer than ideal, but shorter than the situation probably warranted. Western wall entry, vehicle shed staging, compound approach in 2 elements. Torres and Klein through the main structure. Webb and Rourke locating and securing the subsurface access point. Cole would run coordination and manage the unexpected, which was a polite way of saying his job was to handle whatever the plan didn't account for, which in his experience was usually the most important job. Hatch was the problem he didn't have a clean solution to. I can move, Hatch said when Cole looked at him. You've got a through and through in the shoulder and limited mobility on your right side. I can move, sir. Hatch's voice was flat in the way it got flat when he was running on something other than comfort. Give me a pistol on my left hand and put me on Rourke. I'm not staying on this rock. Cole looked at him for a moment, then at Rourke, who nodded. The kind of nod that meant, I've got him. I understand what that means. Fine. Cole looked at his watch. We move in 9 minutes. The 9 minutes were the particular kind of long that came from having a clear objective and no ability yet to do anything about it. Torres checked his kit twice, which was 1 more time than he usually did. Klein adjusted his optic and then adjusted it again, which meant his hands needed something to do. Webb sat against the rock with his eyes open and his expression neutral, which was what Webb looked like when he was building the interior model of the space they were about to enter. Rourke was quiet. He'd been quiet since the first shot came in, but it was a different quality of quiet than before. Earlier it had been the quiet of someone trying to match the tone around them. Now it was more settled, like he'd decided something. Cole noticed it and said nothing. At minute 7, the shot came from above. Clean, hard, the same signature as the earlier engagements. 1 round. And then the kind of silence that meant the last long-range threat on the upper ridge had been addressed. Nobody on the team said anything about it. They were past the point of commentary. At minute 8, Maya came back down the slope. She was moving faster than before, her breathing slightly elevated. Not winded, but working. She'd pushed hard to make the distance and make it back. "North shoulder is clear," she said. "You're good?" Cole asked. She looked at him with an expression that suggested the question was not useful. "Let's move." The western wall was exactly what she'd described. Prefab panels, bolted frame, a section near the southwest corner where the ground rose slightly and cut the effective height from 8 feet to something manageable. Torres went over first, landed in a controlled drop, and reported clear in 2 seconds. Klein followed. Then Maya, moving with a fluid efficiency that didn't look like she was trying to look efficient. It just looked like someone who'd done a lot of things a lot of times and had shed the unnecessary parts. Webb boosted Hatch from below, while Rourke went over first to catch from the top. It wasn't graceful. Hatch grunted once, sharp and controlled, the sound of pain being managed rather than expressed. They got him over. Cole came last. The vehicle shed smelled like diesel and cold metal and something else, an animal smell that might have been livestock at some point and hadn't fully left. 2 vehicles, a heavy-duty truck with a cargo container on the flatbed and a 4-door utility vehicle with what looked like military-grade armor plating. Neither was running. The truck's hood was cool when Cole pressed his hand to it. The utility vehicle was warmer, recent use within the last 6 hours. He filed it. Maya was at the shed's interior door, the one that faced the courtyard, before he'd finished his assessment. She was studying the courtyard through a gap in the door frame without opening it. A thin sliver of visibility, maybe 2 centimeters, but in a lit environment, it was enough. 2 men, she said quietly, right side of the courtyard near the main entrance. One is facing north, one south. They're doing a passive perimeter sweep, not an active patrol. There's a 3rd position at the main structure's 2nd floor window. I can see light movement behind the glass. Observer? Or Overwatch? He's not visible enough for me to call him armed, but I'd assume armed. Cole moved to the gap beside her. The courtyard was flagstone, old, worn smooth, with a central lamp on a post that threw yellow light in a radius that left the edges in shadow. The 2 guards were visible, maybe 30 meters from the shed door. The main structure was 2 stories of stone construction with a reinforced entrance, steel door, hinged outward, which told him something about the original builder's priorities. "Where's the subsurface access?" Webb asked from behind them. "Main structure, northeast corner," Maya said. "There's a floor hatch. I saw it in a photograph from the SIGINT package. Old construction, predates the current occupancy. The lock mechanism should be a bar latch, not electronic." "Should be," Torres noted. "Most things should be what they are," she said without turning. "That's not a guarantee, it's a baseline." Torres looked at Cole. Cole read his expression. Not skepticism exactly, more the look of someone updating their model of another person and not being entirely sure where the update was landing. "How do we handle the courtyard gap?" Klein asked. The 18 meters of open flagstone between the shed door and the main structure entrance, lit, exposed, with 2 armed guards in line of sight. Maya answered before Cole could. "The guards rotate. Not a formal rotation. Informal, driven by the senior man on the right. He moves first, the second follows. When the senior turns north, both of them are looking away from the shed." She glanced at Cole. "That gives you approximately 4 seconds of broken sightline. 4 seconds for 6 people. 4 seconds for the first element. The second element moves when the senior man completes his north rotation and begins to turn south again. He'll look at the main entrance first before he looks at the courtyard. That's another 3 seconds. Cole did the math. "You've been timing them." "I've been watching this compound for 3 days, she said, with the particular patience of someone who had answered this kind of statement before. "Everything I've seen, I timed." Webb made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Cole glanced at him. Webb shook his head slightly. Not disagreement, just the expression of a man recalibrating something fundamental. "Okay," Cole said. "Torres and Klein, first element. You're going on my mark. Get to the main entrance and hold at the frame. Webb and Rourke. Your second element, hatch between you. Maya and I are third." "You should go with the first element," Maya said. Cole looked at her. You're directing the timing. I need to be with you. She held his look for a moment. Your team is going to have a problem with that. My team will manage. Torres, who was listening to this exchange from 2 feet away, said nothing. But the set of his jaw said something that Cole registered and set aside. First element ready, Torres said. His voice had the particular quality it took when he shifted from human to professional. A flattening, a compression, everything that wasn't operational getting pushed below the surface. It wasn't coldness, it was focus. Cole had always found it one of the more impressive things he'd watched Torres do. They waited. The senior guard on the right moved. Mark, Maya said. Torres and Klein were through the shed door before the word fully landed. Cole watched them cross the courtyard through the gap. Fast, low, purposeful, eating the 18 meters in a way that made 4 seconds feel like it had some room in it. They reached the main entrance frame and pressed flat against the stone. The senior guard completed his north turn. Second element, Maya said. Webb took Hatch's left arm over his shoulder. Rourke took the right, carefully, mindful of the injury. They moved in a 3-person unit across the flagstone, and Cole watched them go and noted that Hatch was holding his expression absolutely flat, jaw set, eyes forward, running on something past pain management. They reached Torres and Klein. The guard began to turn south. Now, Maya said. She was already moving as she said it, not pushing Cole, just moving, expecting him to match. He matched. The flagstone was smoother than it looked, and his left boot slid slightly on a worn patch near the center of the courtyard. A quarter-second stumble. Nothing that affected their line, but the kind of thing you noticed afterward and thought about more than it deserved. They made the wall. Cole pressed his back against the cold stone next to Torres and took one breath. The guard completed his southern rotation and looked at the main entrance. They were in shadow, flat against the wall, 2 meters to the left of where he was looking. He looked away. Torres released a breath so quiet Cole only knew it happened because he saw his chest move. The main entrance lock was not a bar latch. It was a deadbolt with an electronic keypad. Not sophisticated, a consumer-grade unit, but enough to kill 4 seconds of anyone's time. Torres looked at it for exactly 2 seconds, then looked at Maya. She was already reaching into a side pouch on her kit. She produced a small device Cole recognized, a RFID emulator the size of a deck of cards, the kind of thing that technically existed only in signals intelligence inventories and technically wasn't supposed to be in the field. Torres looked at the device, then at Cole, with an expression that said a number of things simultaneously. Cole said nothing. Maya ran the emulator across the keypad. 3 seconds of processing. A green light. The deadbolt cycled. The door opened inward. The smell that came out was old stone and diesel exhaust, and the particular human smell of a space where people had been living under stress for an extended period. It wasn't the smell of a clean operational facility. It was the smell of something that had been improvised and then held together with repetition and necessity. Torres went through first, Klein on his shoulder. They were 3 steps into the interior before Cole came through the frame, and by that time Torres had already pressed against the right wall and was working the interior sightlines. The ground floor was a single large space. Original structure, thick stone walls, low ceiling, a staircase to the second level on the far left. There was a table with equipment on it, radio gear, a laptop, 2 chairs. One of the chairs was occupied. The man in the chair had time to register movement before Torres covered the distance. He did not have time to do anything useful with that registration. Torres had him zip-tied and on the floor in 6 seconds. Not brutal, not performative, just efficient and complete. The man made one sound, a short exhaled word in a language that wasn't English, and then stopped making sounds because Torres communicated without words that additional sounds were not a productive direction. Second floor? Cole asked quietly. Observer position, Maya said. 1, maybe 2. The light movement I saw was consistent with single occupancy, but I can't confirm. Klein was already moving to the staircase. Webb positioned at the base, covering the upward angle while Klein climbed. Rourke stayed with Hatch near the entrance. The sound from upstairs was brief. A compressed exchange of movement, a single impact. Then Klein's voice in the earpiece. Clear. 1. He's down but breathing. Cole was already moving toward the northeast corner. The floor hatch was where Maya had said it would be. Stone floor, iron ring handle, a bar latch mechanism that had been updated with a padlock at some point in the recent past. Not electronic. The padlock was a solid 4-digit combination unit. Webb looked at it. "I can cut it. Give me—" "Move," Hatch said. Everyone looked at him. Hatch was standing without Rourke's support, his right arm pressed against his body, his left hand holding his pistol at low ready. He looked at the padlock for 2 seconds, then looked at Webb. "Your bolt cutters are in the left cargo pocket. Get them out so I don't have to watch you forget which pocket." Webb blinked. "Got the cutters." 1 stroke. The padlock shackle parted. Webb pulled the bar latch, grabbed the iron ring, and lifted. The hatch opened on a concrete staircase going down at a steep angle into darkness. The smell that came up was damp and old and confined. The smell of underground space that hadn't been ventilated properly in a long time. And from somewhere below, barely audible, the sound of voices. American voices. Cole descended first, his rifle up and his light on. And the staircase was narrow enough that he had to turn slightly sideways to make the angle, and the ceiling above the bottom step was low enough that he ducked without thinking about it. The space below was a single rectangular room. Concrete walls, dirt floor, a single work light strung from a hook in the ceiling that threw everything in stark shadow. Along the far wall there were 6 people, some sitting, some lying down. All of them in various states of condition that Cole read in a single sweep. Dehydrated, fatigued, a couple of them with injury indicators he'd need Torres to triage, but all of them breathing, all of them conscious or near conscious. One of them, sitting upright against the wall, looking at the staircase with the particular expression of a person who has been waiting for a long time and is not yet willing to believe what they're seeing, was wearing the remnants of an army uniform. She spoke first. "About time," she said. Her voice was steady, controlled. But her hands, Cole noticed, were shaking. He crossed the room in 4 steps and crouched in front of her. "Commander Ethan Cole, SEAL Team 6, we're getting you out." She looked at him, then past him at the staircase, doing what he'd done when he came in, reading the space, counting the assets, running the math. "How many do you have up there?" "Enough," he said. She looked back at him, and her expression said she was calculating whether to believe that. Above them, through the ceiling and the open hatch, Cole heard Webb's voice, compressed, careful, the tone he used when reporting something that required attention. "Sir, we have a problem." Cole stood. "The transport," Maya's voice followed. "It's early." Through the stone ceiling, through the floor of the compound above them, Cole heard it. The sound of vehicles. More than one. Their engines cutting through the fog and the night with the particular weight of heavy machines carrying purpose. Headlights swept across the courtyard window seams, throwing lines of light across the ceiling of the room below. 0400 was still 40 minutes away. The transport had come early. Cole took the stairs in 3 steps. The main floor was still clear. The zip-tied man on the ground hadn't moved, which meant he was either cooperative or had decided that cooperation was the most productive available option. Torres was at the ground floor window, pressed flat against the wall beside the frame, angled to see the courtyard without being seen from it. "Count," Cole said. 2 vehicles. First one's a heavy transport. Looks like a modified cargo truck, canvas back. Second is a technical. Light machine gun on the mount, 2 men visible in the cab. Torres didn't look away from the window. "They're stopping at the vehicle gate. Haven't opened it yet." "How long before they come through?" "Depends on whether they're coordinating with someone inside. If they're expecting a gate response," he paused. "The guy on the floor was probably the gate contact." The guy on the floor said nothing, which was confirmation of a kind. Cole looked at Maya. She was already at the northeast corner of the room, pressed low, watching the courtyard through a different angle, a gap between the window frame and the stone wall that gave her sightline on the vehicle entrance from the opposite direction. "There's a 4th man outside the gate," she said. "He was on the eastern perimeter. He's moving to the gate now, probably responding to the vehicles. He'll open it. 90 seconds, maybe less." Cole's brain was running 2 parallel tracks. The first track was the immediate geometry, positions, timelines, what happened in the next 4 minutes. The second track was the larger problem, 6 non-combatants in a subsurface space who could not move at operational speed, a compound that was about to receive a reinforcement element of unknown size, and an exit route, the western wall, that required crossing an open courtyard. Neither track was producing clean answers. Webb. Cole turned. Webb was at the staircase looking at him. How mobile are they? Two are walking independently. One has a knee. Probably won't run but can move. Two more are compromised. One looks like he took a hit at some point, shoulder or upper arm. The dressing is old. The sixth is the worst. She's been down here the longest. She can stand, but she's not stable. She, Cole said. The one who talked to you. She's putting on a front. Cole processed that. The woman, the one sitting up. What's her rank? Didn't ask? Go ask. Webb went back down the stairs without another word. Cole moved to Torres's position. Through the window, he could see the vehicle gate now. The fourth man had reached it and was doing something with the latch. The heavy transport was idling on the far side, headlights cutting through the fog. He could see movement in the canvas back of the truck, shapes shifting, which meant personnel. More than two. How many in the transport? Can't call it yet. Could be 4, could be 8. Best guess? Torres was quiet for exactly long enough that Cole knew he was actually estimating and not just producing a number. 6, maybe 7. The truck sitting lower than it would be empty. 6 or 7 additional personnel coming through that gate in the next 90 seconds. Into a compound that his team was currently occupying with 6 wounded non-combatants. They couldn't move fast. Cole looked at Maya. Options. She was still watching the courtyard. We can't hold the main structure once that gate opens. Too many points of entry, not enough bodies. She paused. We also can't move the non-combatants through the courtyard while a technical with a machine gun has line of sight. So we need the gate closed. We need the gate closed and that technical blind. How? She turned from the window and looked at him, and he saw something shift in her expression, a kind of internal calculation reaching its conclusion. The truck in the vehicle shed, she said. The cargo truck. What about it? If it moves into the gate approach from inside the compound, it blocks line of sight from the technical. The machine gun can't depress enough to engage anything inside the gate radius. She looked at him steadily. It also physically blocks the gate. Driving a truck into the gate tells them exactly where we are. They're going to know exactly where we are in about 60 seconds regardless. She wasn't being combative. She was being precise. The truck buys us 4 to 6 minutes of blocked entry. That's enough time to move the non-combatants to the western wall. Torres without turning from the window. Someone has to drive it. A silence. I'll drive it, Maya said. Cole looked at her. You're the only one who can cover the courtyard crossing. Then cover it yourself. I'm not a designated marksman. You don't need to be. You need to put rounds on a gate at 30 meters and make it loud enough that 6 frightened people move faster than they think they can. She held his look. I can drive a truck into a gate. I can't be in 2 places at the same time. The gate on the far side of the compound clicked open. 20 seconds, Torres said. Cole made the call. Do it. Webb gets the non-combatants up and moving. Torres and Klein. Courtyard security, western wall. Rourke stays on hatch. He looked at Maya. You've got 30 seconds. She was already moving toward the interior door that connected to the vehicle shed. Maya. She stopped. Cole met her eyes. Don't miss the gate. Something crossed her face that was very nearly a smile and entirely wasn't. I haven't missed anything yet tonight. She went through the door, Sham. The next 4 minutes were the kind of 4 minutes that compressed time in both directions, feeling simultaneously faster than possible and slow enough to register every detail in sharp relief. Cole went to the staircase. Webb, now, get them moving. He heard Webb's voice below, calm, directive, the particular tone that told people what to do without asking how they felt about it. Then movement. Feet on concrete steps. The woman came up first. In the ground floor light, Cole could see her more clearly than he had below. Late 20s, maybe 30. Her uniform was army. The rank insignia was gone, stripped, but the cut in the wear pattern told him officer. Her face had the particular quality of someone running on will, past the point where the body would normally call the negotiation over. She took in the room in one sweep, located Torres and Klein by the window, registered Cole, registered the door Maya had gone through, and made no comment on any of it. Can you direct the others? Cole asked her. Yes. Then do it. Keep them moving toward that door. Don't wait for me. She turned back to the staircase and her voice dropped to a low, firm register. The voice of someone whose authority the others had already accepted, which meant it had been established during the time underground. On your feet, single file, move. They came up. 5 of them in various degrees of condition. Cole read each one as they passed. The man with the knee was limping but carrying himself, using the wall as a guide. The one with the old shoulder dressing was moving his arms stiffly, his face set against the discomfort. 2 others were upright and functional. Dehydration and stress, but nothing structural. The last one was a younger man, late teens or early 20s, and he was shaking in a way that wasn't cold and wasn't injury. Cole put his hand briefly on the young man's arm as he passed. The young man looked at him. "You're out," Cole said. "Keep moving." The shaking didn't stop, but the young man moved. From outside, from the direction of the vehicle shed, Cole heard the truck's engine turn over. A heavy diesel start, rough and loud in the enclosed space of the shed. Then the sound of the shed door opening, and then the truck was moving, and the headlights swept across the courtyard in a wide arc as it came out of the shed at an angle. The men at the vehicle gate had the gate open now. The first figure was coming through on foot, a scout, checking the approach before the transport followed. He saw the truck's headlights and stopped. For a half-second, nobody moved. Then Maya floored it. The truck crossed the courtyard at a speed that didn't match its size. She was pushing it past what the engine wanted to give. And it was a big vehicle on old flagstone, and the back end slid slightly as she corrected the line, but she corrected it, and the truck hit the gate approach at full speed with its headlights on and its horn going. The horn was her addition, presumably to sell the chaos. And the figure at the gate dove left, and the gate took the hit, and the truck came to a stop in the gateway with a crunch of metal that they probably heard on the other side of the ridgeline. The Technical's machine gun tried to depress, couldn't reach the angle. "Move," Cole said into the team channel, and they moved. Torres came off the window. Klein was already at the interior courtyard door. The non-combatants were through in a flow. Not organized, not clean, but moving. The woman from below directing traffic with a quiet intensity that kept the group from fragmenting. Webb was at the rear, watching behind them, watching the main structure for anyone they'd missed on the upper floor. The courtyard was 30 meters of open stone. Cole came through last. He heard shouting from the gate, from the far side of the truck, from the transport personnel who were now trying to figure out what had just happened to their entry point. The Technical's machine gun swung in a wide arc, seeking an angle, finding nothing useful. He heard someone from the transport working the truck's door handle, trying to get into the cab from outside. The courtyard was lit and open, and Cole crossed it at a run without counting the meters. The western wall was in front of him. Torres and Klein were already over. The non-combatants were going over in pairs. The woman from below helping push from this side, Torres catching from the other. It was messy, and it was slow, and the man with the knee made a sound going over the top that Cole would remember later and not enjoy remembering. Webb boosted hatch. Rourke caught. The sound from the gate was getting louder. They were working around the truck. Someone had gotten into the cab and was trying to reverse it out of the gateway, which meant they'd have entry in under 2 minutes. Cole went over the wall. He landed in the dark on the far side, absorbed the impact, came up moving. He counted heads. Everyone was here. Everyone was moving. Then he realized Maya wasn't over the wall yet. He turned back and she was there, coming over the wall in one motion, dropping clean, already upright before he could process that he'd been about to go back. "Truck?" he said. "Running." She fell in beside him. "They'll have it out of the gate in 90 seconds, maybe less. The frame's bent. It'll fight them. 90 seconds to put distance between us and that wall. We won't make enough distance in 90 seconds. Cole knew that. He was already looking at the terrain above the compound. The mountain rising behind them, the fog thick above the 1,800-meter line, the slope offering cover if they could reach it before the gate opened and the Technical got its angle back. "The gully," Webb said from his left. Webb had been running the same calculation. "West approach, the gully you identified earlier. If we get them into the gully before the gate clears..." "The gully's concealed from the vehicle approach," Maya said, "but there's an observer position on the second floor of the main structure we didn't clear." "Klein cleared the second floor," Cole said. Klein cleared one man on the second floor. The room on the north side was closed. She was moving as she spoke, and the group was moving with her, and Cole made a decision in real time that he was going to follow her line because she had information he didn't, and because that had been paying off reliably for the last 40 minutes. If there's a second observer up there, the gully entrance is covered. Can you call it? No. Then we make the gully and find out. The group moved. It wasn't a run. 6 non-combatants in various degrees of compromise didn't run. They moved as fast as their individual limits allowed, and the result was a ragged, stretched-out line pushing upslope through the dark. The woman, Cole still didn't have her name, was managing the group's pace from the middle, reading the terrain ahead and calling it in low words to the people around her. She was doing it without being asked and doing it well. The man with the shaking had stopped shaking. He was focused now, which was what forward movement did. It gave the mind something concrete to attach to. The gully entrance was 60 meters upslope from the western wall. They made it in under 2 minutes. Behind them, Cole heard the vehicle gate scrape open. The gully was narrow, 2 meters at its widest, carved by snowmelt over geological time, lined with loose rock and scrub vegetation that grabbed at gear and clothing without apology. It ran at roughly a 40-degree angle up the slope, which was steep enough to make the breathing hard and slow enough that the footing was manageable if you were careful. Nobody had time to be careful. They moved up the gully as fast as the terrain allowed. Torres was at the front, picking the line. Cole was at the rear, listening to the compound below. He could hear the transport vehicle disgorging personnel. Doors, boots, commands in a language that wasn't English. He could hear the Technical's engine revving as it repositioned. What he didn't hear was gunfire directed upslope, which meant either the north side room had been empty or whoever was in it hadn't yet identified the gully, or they were waiting. Cole climbed and didn't let himself pick between the options. 50 meters up the gully, Torres stopped. Cole came forward, pressing past the non-combatants who had stopped behind Torres like a slow accordion. He reached the front and saw what Torres saw. The gully ended. Not a gradual opening, an abrupt terminus where a rockfall at some point in the recent past had deposited a pile of granite debris 2 meters high across the full width of the channel. Old fall, maybe 2 seasons. Packed solid. Around it? Cole asked. Torres shook his head. Exposed on the left. I can't see the right in this light. Cole looked up. The fog above them was dense. The 2,800-meter ceiling was another 100 meters of elevation. If they could get above it, the Technical's line of sight was broken, but the blockage was directly in the way. Over it, Maya said from behind him. With them? Torres gestured at the group. Over it. She was already at the base of the debris pile, running her hands along the surface. Not randomly, methodically, finding the load-bearing points, identifying the route. Give me 40 seconds. Torres looked at Cole. Cole nodded. She went up the pile the way she went up everything, efficiently, without wasted movement, testing each placement before committing weight. She reached the top in 18 seconds, which was 22 seconds faster than Torres's skepticism had implied she'd manage. She looked at the far side, then back down at them. Far side is clear, slope levels for about 10 meters, then resumes. It's manageable. Can they make this? Cole asked, meaning the non-combatants. The ones who can't make it need someone behind them pushing. She held out her hand downward. Send them up. What followed was not graceful and was not fast and was not the kind of thing that would photograph well for any kind of institutional record. It was 6 people in various degrees of exhaustion and injury climbing a debris pile in the dark and the fog, with hostile personnel somewhere below them and an undetermined timeline before those personnel located the gully. The man with the knee almost didn't make it. He got 3/4 of the way up and his leg gave, the joint buckling outward in a way that made him go white in the darkness, and he made no sound, which was somehow worse than if he'd made a sound. Webb was behind him, and Maya was above him, and between them they got his weight redistributed and got him over and got him down the far side without losing him. The young man who'd been shaking went over without help. He was the 4th one up. He found handholds. Cole wouldn't have found and moved with a quickness that surprised everyone, including, it seemed, himself. The woman with the army uniform went last of the non-combatants. She climbed without assistance and made no comment about it. Cole was at the base of the pile, watching the gully below, when he heard the first voice. Not far enough below. A command, sharp and directed. Someone giving a bearing to someone else. Then movement sound. Boots on loose rock, the particular cadence of a search pattern rather than a pursuit. They hadn't identified the gully yet. They were sweeping. Cole went up the pile. He made the top in 12 seconds because he was not trying to be careful, and because the footing he'd watched 11 other people navigate was now a known quantity. He came down the far side and the group was moving upslope again, and he fell in behind them. 20 meters below the debris pile, he heard a voice in the gully on the other side, loud, certain, the tone of someone who had found something. They'd found the gully. The next 8 minutes were running minutes, which meant they were not really running but moving at the fastest speed the terrain and the people allowed, which was faster than it felt and slower than Cole wanted. The slope above them steepened as the fog lowered, and the fog came down to meet them earlier than expected. They hit the ceiling at around 1,750 meters, which was 50 meters lower than it had been when Cole had checked it from the lower ridge. Weather building at elevation, like the wind had suggested. Inside the fog, the visibility dropped to approximately 8 meters, which meant the technical couldn't see them, the searchers below had lost visual, and the pursuit had to go to noise tracking, which meant silence was now the asset. Cole held up a fist. The group stopped. Everyone stood still in the fog and made no sound. Below them, the search voices were working through the gully. They'd be past the debris pile in under a minute. The pile that had slowed an injured group going up would slow an uninjured search element going up by maybe 30 seconds. Cole did the math and didn't love it. He moved to Maya. Extraction point. Northwest Ridge designated LZ Bravo, she said quietly. Originally a 3-kilometer overland from the compound, from our current position, closer to 2.2. Time? 45 minutes at their pace. She glanced at the group. Possibly 55. We have 40 minutes before they clear that debris field and re-establish pursuit. She looked at him steadily. I know. So we need 10 minutes from somewhere. She was quiet for 4 seconds, which was 4 seconds of actual thought rather than hesitation. Cole had started being able to tell the difference. The ridge spine above us, she said. At 1850 meters, it narrows. The pursuit would have to go single file through a choke point approximately 6 meters wide. She paused. One position at the choke point holds indefinitely against a force moving uphill. You'd be alone at the choke point. Yes, in the fog. The fog is my environment tonight, she said without emphasis. It's not theirs. Cole held her look and ran the calculation he didn't want to run, and reached the conclusion the math pointed toward. How long can you hold it? Long enough? That's not an answer. It's the only honest answer I have. She met his eyes. Get them to LZ Bravo. Get your extraction on the air. When the LZ is prepped, radio me and I'll disengage. And if you can't disengage? She looked at him for a moment. Not at the group, not at the mountain, at him. Then you complete the mission, she said, same as it was always going to be. Cole held that for 1 second, one single second that felt like a longer unit of time, and then he turned to Webb. You have point, LZ Bravo, Northwest Ridge, move them. Webb looked at him, then at Maya, then back at Cole. His expression didn't change, but something in it did. Some small adjustment that Cole recognized as Webb processing something he wasn't going to say out loud. Copy, Webb said. He turned to the group and started moving them upslope. Torres stopped beside Cole, looked at Maya. We'll get the LZ up fast, Torres said, which was not a thing Torres normally said to people and which contained everything Torres would not say directly. Maya nodded once. Torres moved. Cole was the last to go. He looked at Maya. In the fog. In the dark. At the woman who had been on this mountain for 3 days before any of them had arrived. I'll have the radio up in 20 minutes, he said. I'll be listening. She paused. Move faster than you think you can. He turned and went after his team. Behind him, Maya Voss turned and faced down the slope, and the fog moved around her and closed over the space she occupied, and she was gone the same way she was always gone, completely and without ceremony. Below them, the search voices had reached the debris pile. Cole heard them working it, and he moved faster. The choke point was everything she'd described. That was the thing that occurred to Cole 11 minutes later, moving upslope through the fog with Webb at point, and the non-combatant spread between them, that she'd described it accurately, which meant she'd mapped this terrain in detail, which meant that 3 days ago, when she'd arrived on this mountain, she had already identified every position, every fallback, every place where numbers could be negated by angles. She had planned for a scenario exactly like this one, or she had planned for something worse, and this was the easier version. He was 60 meters from the choke point when he heard the first shot from below. One round, suppressed. The sound compressed and directional in the fog. Then silence. Then a second round. Then silence again. The search voices below had stopped. Cole kept moving. The shots told him several things simultaneously. The pursuit had reached the choke point and encountered something that required engagement. The engagement had been brief. The searchers had gone quiet, which meant either they'd taken casualties or they'd taken cover. In either case, the pursuit had slowed. She was holding it. He reached Webb at the front of the group. Pace. Going as fast as faster. Webb pushed the pace. The non-combatants responded, not because they had reserved they'd been conserving, but because the sounds below had told them something that words hadn't needed to. The woman, Cole still didn't have her name, was moving at the back of the non-combatant group, practically carrying the man with the compromised knee. She had his arm over her shoulder, and she was climbing a 40-degree slope in the fog at altitude, and she was not stopping. Cole fell in beside her. "Name," he said. She glanced at him. Her breathing was controlled but working. "Sergeant First Class Dana Reyes." "Army Intel?" "Signals." A pause, measured by steps. "We were running a monitoring package from a forward position. The compound team hit us 12 days ago." Another pause. "I counted 12 days, could be off." "You're not off," Cole said. "We got the intercept 6 days ago. You were moved here." She processed that without slowing. "How'd you find us?" "We didn't." Cole kept his eyes on the terrain above. "We were looking for Rains." A brief silence. "Rains is here," she said. "I know." "He was in the compound." She adjusted the knee-injured man's weight. "He left about 4 hours ago. Vehicle extraction, I heard it from below. 2 vehicles, headed south." Cole stopped moving. Reyes didn't stop. She kept climbing, taking the man with her. Cole stood in the fog on the slope for exactly 2 seconds while everything he knew about the mission rearranged itself around that one fact. Rains had left 4 hours ago. The objective, the reason they were on this mountain, the reason the SEAL team had been inserted, the reason Maya had been pre-positioned, was gone. He started moving again. Webb was looking back at him from 15 meters ahead, reading the stop and start the way Webb read everything. "Problem?" Webb asked quietly when Cole reached him. "Different kind," Cole said. From below, a third shot from Maya's position. Then a fourth, almost immediately after, faster spacing, which meant the pursuit had found cover and was attempting to maneuver rather than absorb. Then a fifth shot. Then silence that lasted long enough that Cole counted to 8 before it ended. Then his radio came alive. Not Maya. A different channel. His extraction request coming back approved. The helo inbound, ETA 22 minutes to LZ Bravo. He pushed the radio hard against his ear and confirmed the LZ coordinates, and gave the authentication code and listened to the response, and then looked at the fog above him where LZ Bravo sat somewhere in the dark. 22 minutes. They had to make it. And Maya had to hold long enough for them to make it, and then she had to disengage from a choke point she was holding alone against a search element that now knew exactly where she was. Cole looked downslope into the fog that was hiding everything, and he felt something he didn't have a clean name for. Not quite fear, not quite helplessness, something that lived in the space between accepting a plan and living with what the plan required. He keyed his radio to Maya's channel. "Voss, helo inbound, 22 minutes. Hold." Static. Then, "Copy." Her voice was exactly what it always was. Level, compressed, matter-of-fact. Then, "You should know the pursuit element is 8 men, not 6. They had a second transport vehicle I didn't flag." Cole processed that. "How are you doing?" he asked. A pause. A different kind of pause than her thinking pauses. Shorter, and with something in it that might have been, in other circumstances, something like acknowledgement. "Managing," she said. The radio clicked off. Cole turned back upslope. "Move," he said, and meant it. They made LZ Bravo with 6 minutes to spare. That was the number Cole fixed on afterward. Not because 6 minutes was comfortable, but because it was the exact margin between the plan working and the plan failing, and margins that thin had a way of teaching you things about what you'd gotten right and what you'd gotten lucky on, and it was important not to confuse the two. The LZ was a natural clearing on the northwest ridge, roughly 40 meters across, rock and compressed soil, the fog sitting maybe 30 meters above it, like a ceiling that had been installed at the wrong height. Webb had the IR strobes out and active inside 90 seconds of arrival. The non-combatants were positioned at the clearing's western edge, out of the helo's approach path. Torres and Klein were on the perimeter. Rourke had Hatch sitting upright against a boulder, keeping the shoulder immobilized, doing the periodic checks that meant he was monitoring and not just hoping. Cole was on the radio. The helo pilot's voice was steady and professional, giving him approach vectors and ETA updates in the compressed language of people who had done this enough times that the urgency was baked into the procedure rather than expressed in the tone. 14 minutes, then 12, then 10. Cole kept half his attention on the radio and half on the slope below the LZ. Maya hadn't called. He'd checked his watch 4 times in the last 8 minutes. The math was simple, and he didn't enjoy doing it. From the choke point to the LZ was approximately 400 meters of elevation gain in difficult terrain, minimum 20 minutes at her pace, and that assumed clean disengagement. If she was still in contact at the choke point, if the pursuit element had pinned her position and she was managing rather than braking, then 20 minutes was optimistic. He keyed her channel again. Voss, 8 minutes to LZ. What's your status? Static. Then, moving. 3 minutes behind you, maybe 4. Pursuit? A pause that was fractionally longer than her usual pauses. Managed. He wanted to ask what managed meant. He didn't ask because the answer would take time she didn't have, and he'd know what it meant when she got here, or he'd know what it meant if she didn't. Copy, he said. LZ is hot and waiting. He walked to where Reyes was sitting. She'd taken a position near the non-combatants that was simultaneously resting and supervising, one of those dual-purpose postures that people defaulted to when they'd been in charge long enough that the habit became structural. Helo's inbound, he said. 7 minutes. She nodded. She was looking at the slope below, the same way he'd been looking at it. The woman who held the choke point, she said. Captain Voss. She was alone down there. Yes. Reyes was quiet for a moment. She's been on this mountain since before we were moved here. I heard her rifle 3 nights ago. Thought it was a hunter. She paused. There are no hunters at this elevation. Cole said nothing. Who does she work for? I don't have a full answer to that. Reyes looked at him. Best partial answer? Cole met her eyes. Someone who knew the situation was more complicated than the brief and positioned assets accordingly. She held his look for a moment and then looked back at the slope. Someone should have told you. Yes, he said. They should have. The helo was audible before it was visible, the particular thumping rhythm of a heavy-lift platform working at altitude, the sound bouncing off the ridgeline in ways that made the direction hard to pin. Then the lights appeared in the fog above them, descending through the ceiling with the controlled confidence of a pilot who had done mountain extractions enough times to be unimpressed by the difficulty. Cole had the strobes in the pilot's visual before the helo broke through the fog layer, and the descent was clean. Not perfect. The wind at LZ elevation had a lateral component that pushed the nose slightly left twice on the way down, and the pilot corrected both times with the brisk efficiency of someone who was annoyed by the weather rather than threatened by it. The wheels touched down with a solid thump. The door gunner had his weapon scanning before the rotors had even settled into their idle rhythm. Cole pointed at Webb. Webb turned to the non-combatants and did what Webb did, directed traffic without drama. They moved toward the helo in a tight group, the door gunner tracking with his eyes rather than his barrel as they approached, reading them fast. Friendly, wounded, civilianish, not a threat. The man with the knee needed help getting up the step. The young man who'd been shaking helped him without being asked. Cole checked his watch. Then he checked the slope. Commander? Torres, from the southern perimeter. His voice had a specific quality. Movement on the slope. Cole moved to him. Torres was looking downslope into the fog margin, the zone where visibility degraded from workable to nothing, maybe 15 meters below the LZ's edge. There was movement in it. A single figure, moving uphill at a pace that was clearly faster than comfortable and clearly slower than the person wanted. Maya came out of the fog 9 seconds later. She was moving with the controlled urgency of someone who had pushed past a threshold somewhere below and was running on stored reserves. Her ghillie suit was damaged on the left side. Something had caught it or taken a piece of it, the fibers shredded in a diagonal line across the shoulder. Her rifle was on her back. Her right hand was pressed against her left forearm. Cole was moving toward her before he decided to move. She saw him coming and shook her head, the small, definitive shake that meant don't make it into something. "I'm mobile," she said. "Your arm." "Rock fragment. It's not—" She stopped, adjusted. "It's not deep." He looked at her forearm. The sleeve was dark with blood in a way that suggested rock fragment was doing some work as a descriptor. It wasn't arterial. The color and the rate were wrong for arterial. But it wasn't nothing. "Torres," Cole said. "On it," Torres said, and produced a trauma kit from his plate carrier with the ease of someone who had been waiting to be useful. Maya let him work on it without comment, which told Cole more about her condition than anything she'd said, because the Maya Voss he'd been operating with for the last several hours did not passively accept things done to her person without at minimum establishing the terms. Torres was efficient and thorough. He didn't talk while he worked, which was one of Torres's qualities Cole had always appreciated. "Pursuit element?" Cole asked. "Disengaged at the choke point when I moved," she said. She was watching Torres's hands. "They have at least 2 casualties, maybe 3. They made a decision to hold rather than follow, which was the right decision for them and the right outcome for us." "You took fire." She looked up at him. "Briefly." "Briefly," he repeated. The fog complicated their targeting. She paused. "More than it complicated mine." Torres secured the dressing, pressed her sleeve back down over it, and gave the wrap 2 firm pats that meant done, hold pressure if needed. He stood up and looked at Cole, and Cole read his face and filed what he saw there. "Helo's waiting," Cole said. They moved. The flight out took 38 minutes. Cole spent most of it doing things that needed doing: radio traffic, personnel accountability, preliminary mission report in the compressed format that command required before the wheels were cold on the ground. The non-combatants were distributed across the Helo's bench seating, most of them down the moment the vibration of the aircraft replaced the uncertainty of the mountain. The young man was asleep before they cleared the ridgeline. The man with the knee had his eyes closed and his jaw set in the way of someone managing pain by refusing to acknowledge it existed. Reyes was awake. She sat near the forward end of the bench, her back straight, watching the door gunner and the dark outside the window alternately. She had the bearing of someone who had processed that she was out and was now moving directly to the next phase, which was figuring out what had happened and what it meant and what the appropriate response was. Cole respected that. Hatch was sleeping, which Torres said was fine. Maya sat near the rear of the helo, apart from the non-combatants and apart from the team, in the small way that wasn't antisocial but was clearly deliberate. She'd accepted a water bottle from Rourke without being asked and had drunk half of it and then sat with it resting on her knee, her eyes going to the window and then coming back to nothing in particular. Cole made his way back to her when the radio work was done. He sat across from her, their knees close in the cramped space. She looked at him when he sat down, which was more acknowledgement than he'd expected. "Rains is gone," he said. "I know. I picked up the vehicle movement 4 hours ago. I couldn't confirm identity at distance and in the dark, so I didn't log it as confirmed." She paused. "I should have flagged it as probable and called it up." "Would it have changed the mission parameters?" She was quiet for a moment. "It would have changed the timeline. If Command had known Rains was mobile, they might have redirected." She looked at the window. "Or they might not have. Rains was the stated objective. The Americans in that compound weren't in the brief." "Someone knew," Cole said. She looked back at him. "The second intercept," he said. "The one that brought you in. The one that came 3 days before ours." He held her gaze. "What was in it exactly?" She was quiet for 4 seconds. Not the thinking quiet, the deciding quiet. "Personnel movement," she said finally. The intercept included a reference to American military prisoners being transferred to the Blackstone compound. The reference was partial, flagged as low confidence by the analysts who decoded it. She paused. The flag was maintained at low confidence in the final product. But you didn't think it was low confidence. I thought it was worth positioning for. She looked at her hands for a moment. My tasking authority agreed. Command didn't know about the personnel until you found the transmission. Cole processed that. Somebody made a decision about what information was mission critical. Somebody made a decision about what information fit the mission as it was already built. Her voice was even, not bitter. Those aren't the same decision. The helo banked slightly, and through the window Cole could see the first gray hint of pre-dawn on the eastern horizon. Not light yet, the suggestion of light. The sky remembering that it had once been a different color. 17, he said. She looked at him. That's what I was told. 17 independent operations. Her expression didn't change in any obvious way. But something in the set of her face shifted slightly, like a photograph coming a fraction more into focus. Who told you that? You've been on somebody's radar for a while, he said. Your file is compartmentalized enough that I got a summary rather than the document, but the number was in the summary. She looked at the window. 17 is current. Every unit you supported came home. She didn't respond to that. It wasn't the response of someone who didn't have a response. It was the response of someone who had decided that particular framing didn't fit what she knew about those operations. Not every outcome was clean, she said finally. Not every decision was right the first time. She paused. 17 operations means 17 situations where something had gone wrong before I arrived. The metric isn't that I'm good at what I do. The metric is that the situations required someone in addition to what was already there. Both things can be true, Cole said. She looked at him briefly, then back at the window. Your man, Hatch. He'll need the shoulder worked on when you land. I know. The woman from the compound, Reyes. She's going to need a full medical workup before she's debriefed. She's running on adrenaline and will crash in the next 2 to 3 hours. I know that too. The young man, Maya. He said her name and she stopped. He waited until she looked at him. You can stop reporting. She held his look for a moment. Something passed through her expression that he couldn't fully name. Not vulnerability, but the shadow of something adjacent to it. The shape of the territory without the territory itself. Habit, she said. I know. They sat in silence for a while, the helo working through the dark, the team sleeping or trying to around them. The forward operating base was a converted agricultural facility, 40 kilometers from the range. Hardened walls, a medical station, a communications hub, and the particular atmosphere of a place that had been repurposed in a hurry and never quite shed the original function. The smell of the medical station was antiseptic over something that might have been livestock, which Cole found both incongruous and oddly appropriate. Hatch went into the medical station first. Torres went with him, which meant Torres wanted to make sure the medical staff understood the injury context, which was Torres's way of making sure Hatch got the right treatment without making it seem like Torres was supervising the medical staff, which would have gone poorly. The non-combatants, Cole had stopped thinking of them as non-combatants and started thinking of them as Reyes and her people, went through initial medical screening in a separate section. The military doctor on site was a calm woman named Lieutenant Commander Park, who had the precise manner of someone who had seen enough incoming casualties to be efficient rather than reactive. She did her assessments in order of apparent severity, starting with the shoulder injury and the knee, and moving through the others without hurry and without commentary. Cole gave his preliminary report to the base commander, a Navy captain named Garrick, who had the tired eyes of a man who had been managing a forward station for too many rotational cycles and had replaced most of his emotional reactions with procedural ones. Garrick listened, asked clarifying questions, and took notes on a legal pad which struck Cole as somewhat archaic and also weirdly comforting. The primary objective, Garrick said when Cole finished. Gone before we arrived, Cole said. Confirmed. Confirmed by one of the recovered personnel. She heard the vehicle movement 4 hours before our insertion. Garrick made a note. We had satellite coverage on the southern approach road. I know. There was no flagged vehicle movement on that coverage. Cole looked at him. I'm aware of what the satellite coverage showed, Captain. A brief silence. Garrick set his pen down. He looked at Cole with the eyes of a man who understood exactly what was being implied and was not yet deciding what to do with it. You're suggesting the coverage had a gap. I'm suggesting the vehicle Rains used to leave didn't appear on the coverage we had access to, Cole said carefully. Whether that's a technical gap or another kind of gap is above my pay grade to determine. Garrick held his look for a moment, then picked up his pen. The recovered personnel, 6? 6. Army Signals Unit, Forward Monitoring Package. Sergeant First Class Dana Reyes appears to be the senior element. Cole paused. She'll have a detailed account of their detention and the compound's internal structure. Her timeline is approximately 12 days, possibly longer. And the woman your team encountered on the mountain. Captain Maya Voss? Cole had been waiting for this. She was pre-positioned, 3 days before our insertion. She had a second intercept that our team wasn't briefed on. Garrick stopped writing. She had low confidence intelligence indicating American personnel at the compound, Cole continued. That intelligence was assessed and maintained at low confidence at the product level. She was positioned as a precautionary asset. He paused. Without that asset, we take additional casualties on the North Ridge. Without that asset, we don't make the LZ in time. Without that asset, 6 Army personnel get transferred to a secondary location at 0400, and we don't find them until someone has time to build a longer-term intelligence picture. Garrick set his pen down again. This time he kept it down. Commander Cole, I'm not asking for anything, Cole said. I'm giving you an accurate account of what happened on that mountain. That's what preliminary reports are for. A longer silence. Where's Captain Voss now? Medical station? Cole kept his face neutral. Her arm needed cleaning. She declined general treatment beyond that. I'll need to speak with her. I assumed you would. Garrick looked at him. Is there a reason you're telling me that before I can ask you to arrange it? There's a reason I want you to know that I know you'll want to speak with her, Cole said. And a reason I want you to know that I've already spoken with her, and that I intend to write my report in enough detail that the conversation you'll be having with your chain of command about what was known and what wasn't shared and what decisions were made about that is a conversation that will be very well supported by the record. Garrick was quiet for a long moment. You think there's a problem in the coordination chain, he said. I think there's a question in the coordination chain, Cole said. The answer to that question is above my level, but the question exists. He stood because the conversation had covered what it needed to cover, and Garrick was a man who processed better when given time to process. The team is available for full debrief in 4 hours, Cole said. We'll need the medical status on hatch first. The recovered personnel should be cleared by medical before formal debrief. My recommendation is 24 hours minimum. He left before Garrick could decide whether to make it a longer conversation. Maya was in the medical station's eastern bay when Cole found her. The arm had been cleaned and properly dressed. The wound was deeper than rock fragment suggested, more of a gash, the kind of thing that happened when a round impacted stone close enough to send fragments at a velocity that made them more than cosmetic. Park had closed it with 6 sutures and dressed it and left strict instructions about elevation and rest that Maya had acknowledged in the tone of someone who intended to evaluate those instructions against other priorities. She was sitting on the edge of the examination table, her sleeve rolled down over the dressing, when Cole came in. Across from her, in the bay's single chair, sat a man Cole didn't recognize. He was wearing civilian clothes, technical fabric, good quality, the kind of nondescript professional gear that was either high-end outdoor wear or a specific kind of institutional uniform. He was around 50, lean, with close-cropped gray hair, and the kind of face that had been organized by years of managing situations from a distance. He had a coffee cup in his hand, and he was looking at Maya with an expression that was somewhere between concern and something more complicated. He looked at Cole when Cole came in, assessed him in 2 seconds. "Commander Cole," he said. Not a question. "You have me at a disadvantage," Cole said. "Often the preferred position." He didn't elaborate on that. He looked back at Maya. "I was telling Captain Voss that her preliminary assessment matched the outcome data." "Her assessment was accurate," Cole said. He moved into the bay and didn't wait to be invited. "She also withheld information that would have changed our pre-mission planning." Maya looked at him. The man in the chair looked at him. "The personnel intercept," Cole said. "Low confidence or not, that information belonged in the mission brief. 6 Americans spent 12 days in a hole under a mountain because somebody decided that flag wasn't worth raising above the product level." The man in the chair set his coffee cup down. "The intercept confidence level was—" "I know what the confidence level was," Cole said. "I also know that Captain Voss was pre-positioned based on that intercept. which means somebody in her chain made a decision that the intercept was worth acting on, just not worth sharing. A silence. "You're describing a coordination failure," the man said. "I'm describing a decision. Whether it was a failure depends on how it was made and why." Cole kept his voice level. "I'd like to know the answer to that." The man looked at Maya. Maya was looking at Cole, and her expression had something in it that was difficult to read. Not discomfort, but the look of someone watching a thing unfold that they had expected but not expected quite like this. "Commander," she said carefully. "I'm not attacking your chain," Cole said to her. Then he looked at the man. "I'm establishing the record. My team went into a compromised situation without complete information. The outcome was good. The next time the outcome might not be good, and the record should reflect what contributed to the gap so that whoever reviews it can make an informed decision about the process." The man in the chair looked at Cole for a long moment. "You're going to be difficult to work around," he said finally. "That's not my intent." "I know it isn't." He picked his coffee back up. "The intercept decision was mine. The confidence assessment was technically accurate. The language was fragmentary, and the source reliability was borderline. I made a judgment call that the intercept warranted precautionary positioning without warranting full mission integration." He paused. "That judgment call was based on an operational picture that was, in retrospect, missing relevant context." "The satellite gap," Cole said. The man's expression shifted slightly. "What satellite gap?" Cole told him. The vehicle movement Reyes had heard. The satellite coverage that showed nothing. The gap between what Rains had done and what the coverage had captured. The man in the chair was very still when Cole finished. "You're telling me Rains had satellite awareness," he said. "I'm telling you Rains left undetected." Cole held his look. "What that implies is your problem to work." A longer silence. Maya spoke. If he had coverage timing, he knew when to move. She was looking at the floor, working it out, which means he knew the coverage parameters, which means someone in the operational chain passed him the parameters. She looked up. "That's not a satellite gap. That's a source." The man in the chair closed his eyes briefly. A controlled movement, not an emotional one. The movement of someone who had just received confirmation of a thing they had been trying not to confirm. "This conversation," he said, "is going to get significantly more complicated." "Yes," Cole said. "It is." He looked at Maya. She was looking at the man in the chair, and something was passing between them in the silence that Cole read as a long-standing professional relationship hitting a moment that changed its shape. Not a rupture, a recalibration. The kind that happened when new information arrived that made the previous framework insufficient. "The primary objective," the man said finally, looking at Cole. "Rains. If he had source coverage, if he knew when to move and someone helped him move, then what we were looking at was never just an intelligence trafficking operation." "No," Cole said. "It wasn't. It's an active penetration." Cole said nothing because there was nothing to add to that. The words sat in the medical bay's clean air and occupied the space its implications required. Maya looked at her arm, at the dressing, at nothing in particular. "The second intercept," she said, "the one I came in on." She paused. "If there's a source in the coordination chain, then the intercept I received may have been specifically constructed to position me where I'd be visible." The man in the chair looked at her sharply. "You're saying—" "I'm saying I was on that mountain for 3 days," she said, "in a fixed position, running a predictable assessment pattern." She looked at Cole. If someone wanted to know what assets were covering that range, if they wanted to confirm what was in the area before Rains moved, a 3-day pre-positioned asset on an unambiguous assessment track is a useful intelligence product. Cole felt the implications of that assemble in real time. "You're saying someone used your own mission to surveil you," he said. "I'm saying it's a question worth asking." Her voice was steady. "I'm saying I may have been the most visible thing on that mountain for 72 hours, and Rains left 4 hours before you arrived, and the timing of that departure relative to my arrival date is something someone should calculate." The man in the chair was very still. Then he stood slowly with the movement of someone carrying new weight. "I need to make some calls," he said. He looked at Maya. "You stay available." "I'm not going anywhere," she said. He looked at Cole. "Your report." "Will be accurate," Cole said. The man left. The bay was quiet. Through the partition wall, Cole could hear the low sounds of the medical station's other occupants. Movement, voice, the beep of monitoring equipment. The sounds of people being reassembled. Maya was looking at the wall. "You didn't know," Cole said, "about the possibility that you were being used." "No." She said it simply, without defensiveness. "I didn't know." "You know now." "Yes." He sat down in the chair the man had vacated. It was still warm. 17 operations, he said. She looked at him. "Somebody built that number deliberately," he said. "Somebody needed a specific kind of asset in specific kinds of situations. Situations that were already compromised, where units were already in trouble. And they used you for it, repeatedly." She was quiet for a long time. "I was effective," she said finally. "You were." He held her look. "You were also being deployed in situations where the intelligence picture had already been manipulated, which means whoever controlled those situations, whoever created the conditions that required you to be there, may have known you'd be there. The implications of that were large enough that neither of them tried to address all of them at once." "The outcomes were still real," she said. Her voice had something in it that Cole hadn't heard before. Not uncertainty, but the texture of someone standing in a place where the ground was less solid than it had looked. "The people who came home came home." "They did," he said. "That doesn't change." "No," he said. "It doesn't." She looked at the dressing on her arm, at the clean white of it against her skin. "I need to think," she said. Cole stood. "There's a cot in the next bay. I'll tell Park to check back in an hour." She didn't respond to that, which meant she'd heard it. He walked to the bay entrance, then stopped. "Voss?" She looked at him. "Whatever was used against you, whatever they built around you, the work was real. What you did on that mountain was real." He paused. "That's also part of the record." She held his look for a moment. Then she looked back at the wall, and Cole left her there with whatever she was working through, because some things couldn't be helped and could only be given space. Outside the medical station, the pre-dawn had become dawn, and the light was cold and clear and merciless in the way high-altitude light was, showing everything at once without apology. Cole stood in it for a moment and let it show him what it wanted to show him. Then he went to write his report. The report took Cole 3 hours and 40 minutes to write. That was longer than any preliminary report he'd ever filed, and he was aware of that while he was writing it, and he wrote it anyway. He wrote it the way the situation required, not the way that was easiest to receive, not the way that minimized friction in the coordination chain, but the way that put every fact in its proper sequence with its proper weight, and let the sequence speak for itself. He included the second intercept. He included the satellite coverage gap and Reyes's account of the vehicle movement timeline. He included the RFID emulator that Maya had produced at the compound entrance, which technically belonged to an inventory that was not supposed to exist in the field, and which technically implied a chain of authorization that someone in a quiet office somewhere was going to have a complicated relationship with. He included the timing, Raines's departure 4 hours before insertion, the pre-positioned asset, the 3-day observation window, and he wrote those details with the careful neutrality of a man who understood that the implications were not his to draw in a preliminary report, but were absolutely his to make impossible to ignore. He put the man in the chair in the report. Not by name. He didn't have a name, but by presence, by the information he'd provided when confronted, by the admission that the intercept decision had been his and that the judgment had been based on an incomplete operational picture. He wrote that sentence 3 times before he was satisfied that it said exactly what it said and nothing it didn't say. He sent it at 0847. At 0912, his radio produced a terse acknowledgement from Garrick's communications staff, which meant the report had been received and was being read by people above Garrick's level, which was exactly what he'd intended. He found his team in the operations area's secondary bay, a room that had been a barn at some point and still had the ceiling beams to prove it, now fitted with folding tables, camp chairs, and a coffee station that had been installed with the kind of care and precision that suggested it was the most important piece of infrastructure on the base. Torres was on his second cup. Webb was sleeping in a camp chair with his arms crossed and his head tilted at an angle that looked deeply uncomfortable and clearly wasn't bothering him at all. Klein was doing something meticulous with his optic, cleaning it, checking the reticle alignment, the kind of detailed maintenance work that hands defaulted to when the mind needed to process without being asked to process. Rourke was sitting at one of the folding tables, looking at nothing in particular. Cole poured a cup of coffee and sat across from him. Rourke looked up. "You did good up there," Cole said. Rourke looked at him for a moment. Hatch did most of the work. Hatch had a through in the shoulder and managed to insult Webb while bleeding on a frozen ridgeline. That's Hatch. You kept him functional and kept your head when the situation changed 3 times in 4 minutes. Cole drank his coffee. That's different. Things matter. Rourke looked at the table. I froze on the ridgeline. When the first shot came in, I froze for about 2 seconds. I know. 2 seconds is 2 seconds is 2 seconds, Cole said. It's also the first time you've been in that specific situation. The freeze is data. What you do with the data is the part that matters. He held Rourke's look. You didn't freeze again. Rourke was quiet for a moment. Then, she was already up there. Yes. 3 days. In that. He shook his head slightly. I keep coming back to that. Cole drank his coffee and didn't say anything, because there wasn't anything to say to that improved on the silence. Torres, without looking up from his cup. The debrief's at 1300. I know, Cole said. Garrick's running it personally, which means someone above Garrick told him to run it personally. Probably. The report went up fast. Torres looked at him now. You wrote it fast. I wrote it as fast as it needed to be written. Torres studied him. There's going to be friction. There's already friction, Cole said. I just made sure it was the right friction. Torres looked at his coffee. She know you put her in the report? I told her what I was writing. She okay with it? Cole thought about that. She understood why I was writing it. Torres accepted that distinction without commenting on it, which meant he understood the distinction. Webb opened his eyes. He hadn't been asleep. Cole had suspected this, but confirmed it now by the immediacy with which Webb's gaze found him, sharp and already engaged. The man in the chair, Webb said. I don't have a name for him yet, Cole said. You will. Webb closed his eyes again. Men like that always have names. Finding them takes time. Hatch was awake when Cole checked in at the medical station at 10:15. The shoulder surgery had been clean. The field dressing had done its job well enough that the trauma surgeon on site, a compact, precise man named Holloway, who had the focused effect of someone who had learned to treat everything as a technical problem and nothing as a personal one, had spent 40 minutes cleaning and closing rather than doing the more significant work a poorly managed wound would have required. He gave Cole a recovery timeline in the careful language of a man who didn't make promises, and then gave him a secondary timeline that was the honest version, and the two were not that far apart. Hatch was sitting up in the bed with his right arm immobilized against his chest and his left hand holding a water bottle. Report, he said when Cole came in. I already filed it. I know. I mean, tell me. Cole told him. All of it, including the pieces that were above Hatch's access level, because Hatch had taken a round on a frozen ridgeline, and that bought him the right to the complete picture. Hatch listened without interrupting, which was unusual for Hatch, who generally treated listening as a competitive event. When Cole finished, Hatch was quiet for a moment. Rains was already gone, he said. Yes. So we went up there, took casualties, pulled 6 people out of a hole, and the primary objective was in a vehicle 4 hours ahead of us. That's an accurate summary. Hatch looked at the ceiling. And someone in the chain may have facilitated that. It's a question being worked. Right. He was quiet again. Then, the woman, Voss. What about her? Is she going to be okay? Cole looked at him. It was an unexpected question from Hatch, who was not typically a person who used the word okay in anything other than its operational sense. She's working through something, Cole said. She'll manage it. She held a choke point alone against 8 men, Hatch said. In the fog, at altitude. Yes. And now she finds out she might have been run as an asset against her own people. Cole didn't correct the framing, because the framing was essentially accurate. Hatch looked at him. That's a specific kind of terrible. Yes, Cole said. It is. Someone should tell her that doesn't change what she did. I told her. Tell her again, Hatch said. Once isn't enough for that kind of thing. Cole looked at him for a moment, then nodded. Hatch picked up his water bottle and drank from it and looked at the ceiling again, and Cole left him to it. The formal debrief convened at 1300 in the Operations Center's main room. Garrick ran it, as Torres had predicted, with the careful efficiency of a man who was aware that the conversation was being recorded and that the recording would be reviewed by people who would read every pause as carefully as every word. He had 2 staff officers with him, a lieutenant commander named Saito, who took notes with the focused speed of someone who had made peace with not having opinions, and a man in civilian clothes who was not the man from the medical station and was not introduced by name and did not introduce himself. Cole's team sat on one side of the table. Maya sat slightly apart from them, which was her default position and which nobody commented on. Reyes was there, with 2 of her people, the ones medically cleared for the debrief, which was all of them except the knee and the young man, who were still being monitored. She sat straight and looked like someone who had slept 4 hours and was running on the competence she'd been building for years rather than any current reserve. Garrick walked the room through the mission timeline from insertion. Cole let him lead it, filling in operational detail when asked, deferring on the intelligence and coordination elements to let the questions come naturally. They came. Garrick asked about the second intercept with the careful neutrality of someone who already knew the answer and was establishing it for the record. Maya answered with the same careful neutrality in return. The man in civilian clothes didn't speak until 40 minutes in. When he did, he addressed Maya directly. Captain Voss, in your assessment, did the intelligence product you received prior to insertion accurately represent the situation on the ground? Maya looked at him. The product I received accurately represented what the analysts had. It did not accurately represent the full situation. Can you characterize the discrepancy? The product flagged the personnel intercept at low confidence and maintained that assessment. My field assessment on arrival was that the intercept was consistent with observed compound activity. Specifically, the below-grade excavation indicators I'd identified from satellite imagery review, and a consumption pattern in the compound's visible refuse that suggested more occupants than the personnel roster implied. You reported this assessment. I flagged it to my tasking authority. She paused. The flag was acknowledged. Acknowledged and acted on? Acknowledged. She held his look. The distinction is in the record. The man in civilian clothes wrote something on the pad in front of him. He had not written anything before this point, which told Cole that the previous 40 minutes had been information he already had, and this was the first thing that required documentation. Garrick moved on. Cole answered questions about the compound approach, the non-combatant condition, the extraction timeline. Reyes answered questions about the detention conditions. Her account was precise and unembellished, delivered in the measured tone of someone who had been processing the experience for 12 days and had organized it into something she could report rather than something she was still surviving. Cole noted how she managed the room, how she answered what was asked and volunteered nothing she wasn't asked, not from evasion, but from the discipline of someone who understood that a debrief was a structured instrument and that structuring your input to match it produced better outcomes than narrative generosity. The unnamed civilian asked her about Rains directly. When she'd seen him, what he'd said, the vehicle movement she'd heard. She answered all of it. When she got to the timing, Rains leaving 4 hours before the insertion, the vehicle movement, the darkness that was supposed to conceal it, the room had a specific quality of silence that Cole had learned to read over years of rooms like this one. It was the silence of people who were adjusting their picture. Sergeant First Class Reyes, the unnamed civilian said, the vehicle movement you described. You heard 2 vehicles. What direction? South Approach Road, she said. I know the compound's perimeter sounds. I spent 12 days learning them. The South Road has a distinctive surface. Gravel over rock. It sounds different from the North Approach. She paused. 2 vehicles. South, approximately 23 and 40 hours. 4 hours before the scheduled transfer. 4 hours before what I understood to be the scheduled transfer. Yes. She looked at him. Someone moved him before the window. Before the American extraction window, the unnamed civilian said. Before what I'd infer was the window for an incoming American operation, Reyes said carefully. I didn't have specific knowledge of the operation. I had 12 days of pattern observation in a compound that was clearly expecting something, and the pattern changed significantly in the 48 hours before the operation. Changed how? increased security, reduced routine communications, and 4 hours before extraction, the command element departed. She paused. That's not a response to a threat. That's a response to a timeline. The silence this time was different, heavier. Cole looked at the unnamed civilian. The unnamed civilian was looking at Reyes with the expression of a man who had been hoping a particular answer wouldn't come and had just received confirmation that it was going to come, regardless of his preferences. He wrote something else on his pad. The debrief ended at 15:47. Garrett closed it formally, gave the standard protocol reminders about information handling and follow-up requirements, and dismissed the room with the efficiency of someone who needed the room to be empty so he could make calls he didn't want an audience for. People filed out. Reyes and her people were met at the door by Lieutenant Commander Park, who had a medical follow-up scheduled and the authority to make it non-negotiable. Torres held the door for them, which was a Torres thing to do when he was doing the version of himself that existed outside operations. Cole was the last of his team out. In the corridor, he found Maya. She was standing near the window at the end of the hall, a small window that faced east, toward the Blackstone Range, which was visible from this distance as a dark line against the sky. The upper elevation still shrouded in the weather that had been building since the night before. She was looking at it the way you looked at something you'd just left and weren't sure about leaving. Cole stopped beside her. They stood in silence for a moment, looking at the range. "The unnamed civilian," she said. "He's from the same institutional address as my tasking authority. Different branch of the same tree. I figured. He's going to find the source." "You think so?" "He already knows where to look," she said. "The satellite gap, Raines's departure timing, the second intercept. Those are 3 data points that converge on a very small number of people with the access to manipulate all 3. She paused. He was writing down what Reyes said because it confirmed the convergence. He already had 2 of the 3. She gave him the 3rd. Cole looked at the range. "So it's already moving. It's been moving since your report went up." She looked at her hands briefly. "You put everything in that report. Everything relevant. Including things that implicated my chain. Including things that were true," he said. "The report is for the record, not for anyone's comfort." She was quiet for a moment. "The man who came to the medical station this morning," she said. "His name is Harlan Graves. He's been my handler for 4 years." Cole absorbed that. "He came to tell me I was being stood down pending review," she said. "Standard protocol when an operation generates a counterintelligence question. He was matter-of-fact about it." She paused. "He also told me he was sorry." "For what specifically?" "He didn't specify." She looked at the range again. "Harlan isn't someone who apologizes for operational outcomes. If a decision went wrong, he takes responsibility in the institutional sense. He owns the process. He corrects the error. He moves on. He doesn't apologize." She paused. "So when he apologized this morning, it was for something he considers personal, not procedural." "He thinks he put you in it." "He thinks he handed someone a tool they used against me, and he didn't see it until it was done." She was quiet for a beat. "Whether that's negligence or something worse is what the review will determine." Cole looked at her. "How do you feel about that?" She held his look for a moment, and the question sat in the air between them in its simple directness. "I don't know yet," she said. "I've been working for Harlan for 4 years. The operations were real. The outcomes were real." She looked back at the range. "If someone was using those operations as cover, if my work was being used to validate a penetration's access or confirm asset deployment for the other side, then every time I helped someone come home, I may have also handed something to someone who shouldn't have had it. The people you helped come home still came home." "I know. That's not nothing." "It's not nothing," she said, "but it's also not everything I thought it was." The mountains sat in the distance, dark and indifferent, the fog still sitting on its upper reaches like it had never moved and never intended to. "What happens during the review?" Cole asked. "I sit in a room somewhere and answer questions, and they determine whether my operations were compromised and to what degree and what the remediation looks like." She paused. "It takes as long as it takes." "And after?" She looked at him. "After, you either come back or you don't," she said. It wasn't resignation. It was the flat acceptance of a person who had learned to look at process without projecting outcome onto it. "I've been doing this long enough to know that the decision isn't mine to make. My part is to give the review everything it needs to make it correctly." That's very institutional of you. Something crossed her face. The closest thing to wry he'd seen from her, brief and unannounced and gone quickly. I've been institutional for a long time, she said. Is that what you want? She looked at him, and the question caught her off guard in a way that the mountain hadn't, which was interesting. What I want, she said slowly, is to know the work was real. Not leveraged, not manufactured, not constructed around an agenda I wasn't part of. Just real. She paused. I want to know that the people I helped come home came home because I was effective, not because letting them come home served a purpose I didn't know about. The people in the compound, Cole said. Reyes. Her people. The young man. They're home because you were on that mountain for 3 days when you didn't have to be. Because you held a choke point alone. Because you drove a truck into a gate in the dark. He paused. That's as real as it gets. She looked at him. Nobody told you to hold the choke point, he continued. Nobody assigned it. You made a calculation and you made a choice. He held her gaze. That choice belongs to you. Whatever else was built around you, that choice was yours. She was quiet for a long time. The light from the eastern window caught the side of her face in the way that morning light caught things, without flattery, showing everything at the same time. The tiredness, the cut on her chin she hadn't mentioned and he hadn't asked about, the particular expression of someone standing at the end of something they hadn't expected to end this way and weren't sure what the ending meant. You should probably sleep, she said finally. Probably. You've been up since before insertion. So have you. She looked at the window. I'm not good at sleeping when things are unresolved. Nothing about this is resolved yet. I know. She was quiet. I'll sleep when I know the review is moving. Cole nodded. He understood that. Some people needed the action taken before the body would release, the mind holding the system in a kind of operational readiness until the thing that needed to be done was done, and only then allowing the rest. He started to move. Cole. He stopped. She was still looking at the window. Thank you for the report. He stood there for a moment. You don't thank me for that, he said. The report is just the truth. I know. She paused. Thank you for the truth, then. He left her there, looking east. But 3 days later, the first name surfaced. It came through Garrick's office at 0630 in the form of a terse communication that was classified above Cole's access level, but which Garrick shared with him anyway, because Garrick had decided, somewhere in the gap between the debrief and the 3 days of institutional machinery that had followed it, that Cole's report had earned him the professional courtesy of knowing what it had set in motion. The name was a signals analyst 3 organizational levels above the product cycle that had generated the second intercept. A civilian employee with 17 years of institutional tenure and a performance record that was immaculate precisely in the ways performance records tended to be immaculate when someone was managing them with an agenda. No major failures, no significant flags, a pattern of outputs that tracked slightly higher than the median in exactly the categories that generated positive visibility. He had been accessing Rains's communication architecture through a layered relay that had been operating for, the counterintelligence assessment suggested, somewhere between 18 months and 2 years. He had been the one who flagged the Blackstone Range intercept at low confidence. He had been the one who had access to the satellite coverage schedule. He had been the one who, 3 days before the insertion, had passed Rains a compressed transmission that contained 2 pieces of information, the extraction window, and a confirmation that a pre-positioned asset was active in the range, Maya's position, her duration, her assessment pattern. Given to Rains on a timeline that matched his departure by exactly 4 hours. Cole read what Garrick showed him and felt the weight of it. The way you felt the weight of things that were both worse and better than you'd feared simultaneously. Worse, because the breach was real and had been running long enough to do serious damage. Better, because it had been found. Because the thread had been pulled and the structure had come apart. Because the sequence of events that had started with a shot on a frozen ridgeline at 2,000 meters had ended with a name in an analyst's office and the machinery of accountability beginning to move. He asked Garrick if Maya had been notified. Garrick said she'd been informed through the review channel at 0500. Cole asked if she was still on base. Garrick said she'd requested transport to a staging facility the previous evening. She'd departed at 0300. Cole sat with that for a moment. Then he stood, thanked Garrick, and walked out. He found Reyes in the operations area at 0715, working through what appeared to be a written timeline reconstruction, a handwritten account of the 12 days, dates, and observations organized with the methodical precision of a signals analyst who had been doing structured documentation for a decade. She looked up when he came in. "Sit down," she said. He sat. "They found him," she said. It wasn't a question. "You heard." "Park told me. She figured I had a right to know." Reyes set her pen down. 17 years. He was inside for almost 2 years. "Yes." She looked at the table, at the handwritten pages. 12 days in that compound. I spent 12 days in a hole thinking about every decision that had been made, every moment where we should have been safer than we were, every indicator we might have read differently. She paused. "It wasn't our indicators. It was someone upstream, feeding the other side our schedule." "Yes." "And the woman who came and got us out." She stopped, adjusted. "The woman who made it possible for you to get us out. Someone used her to tell Rains she was coming, so he could leave before she arrived." "Yes." Reyes looked at him. "She knows." "She knew before we did." "How is she?" Cole thought about Maya at the window, looking east at the mountain. The careful accounting she'd done of what was real and what had been built around her. The way she'd said thank you for the truth, with the directness of someone who had decided honesty was the only currency still worth holding. "She's working through it," he said. "She'll manage it." Reyes looked at him the way people looked at you when they suspected you weren't saying everything. "Will she come back?" she asked. "I don't know," Cole said. "That's her call to make." Reyes was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up her pen. "Then I hope she makes the right one," she said, and went back to her timeline. Cole's team flew out at 400. Hatch was transported on a medical litter with more protest than the situation warranted and less than his character suggested, which meant he was managing discomfort by managing the expression of it and not quite winning. Torres sat beside him for the flight and did not try to make conversation, which was the right call. Klein and Rourke slept. Webb looked out the window for the first hour and then slept too. Cola sat at the forward end of the aircraft and thought about the mountain. He thought about the way fog moved at elevation. Not like fog at sea level, not drifting, but sitting, occupying. The way it had closed over Maya Voss every time she'd moved back into it, complete and immediate, like the mountain was collaborating with her in some way that had nothing to do with mysticism and everything to do with the fact that she had studied that terrain for 3 days before anyone else had arrived. He thought about the shot she'd made at minute 11. The range, the conditions, the fog ceiling, the wind she'd been tracking for 3 days. A shot that most people with a rifle in their hands couldn't conceptualize, that she'd made with the matter-of-fact certainty of someone completing a calculation that had been running long enough to be finished. He thought about her in the choke point, 8 men below her in the dark, the fog that was her environment and not theirs. 5 shots in a sequence that had bought him the 20 minutes he needed, that had gotten 6 people to a helicopter, that had cost her a gashed forearm and 6 sutures and the particular kind of understanding that came from finding out something true about how you'd been used. He thought about what she'd said. That choice was yours. He'd said it to her. He meant it. But he also understood now, at altitude, looking at the clouds below the aircraft, that the thing he'd said was both true and insufficient. That the choice being real and the work being real didn't automatically make the damage done to her smaller, and that the review she was sitting through was going to force her to look at 4 years of work and ask which parts of it had served the people she thought it served and which parts had served someone else's calculation, and that there was no version of that accounting that wasn't painful regardless of what the final number was. He hoped she came back. He didn't know if she would. He knew that was her question to answer, and that some questions could only be answered by the person who had to live with the answer. 6 weeks later, Kola received a communication through the standard routing, administrative, brief, no classification above the ordinary. It was a copy of a commendation recommendation, passed through from a review board he hadn't known was convened. The recommendation covered the Blackstone Range operation and named several individuals. His name was in it. Hatch's name was in it. Reyes's name was in it. Maya Voss's name was in it. The language used for her was careful and institutional and did exactly what institutional language did. It covered the surface of things without showing the shape of what was underneath. But it was there. Her name in the official record, attached to actions that were being formally recognized, which meant the review had reached a conclusion, and the conclusion included her. There was a handwritten note at the bottom of the communication, in handwriting he didn't recognize. It said, "The review closed yesterday. I start the next one on Monday." V. Cole sat at his desk and looked at the note for a while. Then he filed the commendation in his records, got up, and went to work. There was a question asked of Cole later, months after the mountain, at a training seminar for advanced reconnaissance teams that he'd been brought in to speak at, in the dry institutional setting of a conference room that smelled like recycled air and bad coffee. A young officer asked him what he thought true elite performance looked like, the kind of thing that separated the exceptional from the merely excellent. Cole thought about the question for a moment before he answered, because the question deserved an honest answer rather than a convenient one. "The shot nobody saw you set up," he said. "The 3 days before the 3 seconds. The decision you made alone, in the dark, when nobody was watching and nobody would have known if you'd made a different decision." He paused. "Performance is visible. Preparation is mostly invisible. The difference between someone who's good and someone who changes what's possible is usually everything that happened before anyone showed up to watch." The young officer wrote it down, which Cole noted and thought nothing more of. He drove home that evening through a city that was doing what cities did. Indifferent, moving, full of people who didn't know the Blackstone Range existed and would never need to. The light was flat and gray and entirely unlike the light on a frozen ridge at altitude. And Cole found that he was glad for the difference, glad for the ordinary flatness of it, even as he knew he'd be back in terrain that wasn't ordinary before very long. Some people were built for the mountains, for the cold and the fog, and the distances that negated everything except patience and preparation and the willingness to be exactly where you needed to be before anyone knew you needed to be there. Not because they were celebrated for it, not because anyone was watching, but because the work was real and the people who came home, and that was the only accounting that ultimately mattered. The greatest things done in the dark never ask to be seen in the light. They simply hold the line until the people who needed saving are safe, and then they disappear back into the mountain, ready